A stopwatch marked 23:59:48. The blue sky and clouds formed the background of the image. The woman asks what is happening. She seems surprised by the situation. The protagonist reveals that they were in a points campaign at the convenience store. He also says that he got tuna with mayonnaise for Yuka-chan. He delights in the afternoon sunlight and hears the cheerful voices of the children. He asks if eating convenience store rice balls together isn't nice. He is with his friends playing soccer. The protagonist says he earned 50 points for every 1,000 yen spent. Right after, he asks if that isn't incredible. The protagonist says that today is their birthday. The woman says she would understand a restaurant or an izakaya. Then she adds that they are having lunch in the park, with food from the market. The protagonist says it's better to buy at the convenience store because they earn more points. He asks if it's also economical and saves money. The girl says that now she understands. She places her hands on the table in surprise. She says that saving money and points is more important than spending time with her. Right after, she states that if that's the case, she says that he can eat convenience store rice balls for the rest of his life. Immediately after, she punches him. Someone asks the brother if she hit him this time. The speech expresses surprise and concern. She says that his last 3 ex-girlfriends slapped him with open hands. This is the conversation. The boy asks, "Little sister," where he went wrong. The sister asks if he saved money from dates to earn points. She states that he was never dumped for any other reason. She says that girls think they are not worth it if money isn't spent on dates, and asks if he isn't worth the financial investment. The protagonist reflects that spending too much money on every date would never end, right? He says that with their parents deceased, they must survive together. Therefore, saving money every day is essential. The protagonist asks Kyoko to listen carefully because he has 2 dreams. Kyoko thinks this will happen again. The protagonist says that one of his goals is to send her to an art school, and the other is something unspecified, stating that he will live off points as a points nomad, and also says that if he saves enough points, he can use his income for tuition. He says he saves money from dates. He also makes his friends use his points card when they buy. Someone states that's why he gets dumped. The sister asks how many points he has. He responds that he has saved 8 million yen in points in 10 years. The girl says that's insane, while he states that it's not enough, and that it's not even close to being enough to live the rest of his life carefree. The sister says she doesn't care about going to college. She asks him to use the money for himself, and she says she can draw as much as she wants as a hobby. A digital timer marks 15:04:06. He asks if there is a point card. Someone responds yes and hands over the card. An attendant hands something to him. Both are inside a store. He thinks about the company's point service. The service is known as AP. The text states that RAID has surpassed 1.4 billion members since its launch. A sign said that RP was used in 150 countries. It covered every aspect of daily life and pointed to the icons for travel, shopping, and services. It says shopping, dining, travel, entertainment, and utilities. The text states that point systems were consolidated into RAID points. The image shows a handshake between a RAID card and a building. The system announces that at 3 p.m. there will be a revolutionary new service for points and asks everyone to stay tuned. She is on the big screen. She says the corporation has concluded the announcement. The protagonist looks at the big screen. He asks if there is a new service. The timer marks 2 hours and 42 minutes. Time is running. Someone calls out to Asahi, telling him to hurry up and carry the things. He arrives with a box in hand. A guy says he is useless and comments that a new hire is more capable. The guy asks the protagonist what he has done all year. He apologizes. The other mover says that he and the new guy will take care of the equipment in the elevator. He tells another to take the stairs with the boxes, and that if he doesn't carry 10 boxes in 30 minutes, he will kill him. The protagonist says that's absurd, looking surprised and scared. He climbs, exhausted and panting in pain. He thinks they asked him to take the stairs up to the 6th floor, something impossible. but something catches his attention. The protagonist asks what is happening. A door is flying in the city with blue lightning around it. A door appears shining in the sky over Japan. It seems suspended in the air and surrounded by blue sparks. He says it was just the beginning. Another door appears somewhere else. Doors start appearing all over the world. And what came out of the doors shows three figures with strange heads. He says that, of all the part-time jobs, moving is the hardest. He carries a box up the stairs. He says, "Damn," then thinks he needs to earn points to prove what he's made of. He is determined. The countdown reaches 0. The clock shows that it has finished the countdown. The portal starts acting strange. People begin to realize that something big is about to happen. With the sound of a mysterious bell, the first gate appeared in Japan. A creature emerges with lightning around it. A giant demon with fire on its wings attacks a city. It looks very furious as humans flee desperately. A woman is crying. She is surrounded by monsters. The caption states that they have begun a worldwide advance. A plane shoots at a creature, but the caption says modern weapons do not work. Its shell is too resistant. A monster crushes people. It is said that humanity was powerless against those creatures. The protagonist flees with a terrified expression. He tries to escape from nearby debris. He says that monsters came out of a glowing gate. Then he asks what is happening. The demon attacks with force. It tries to strike the protagonist. The protagonist screams with a terrified expression. He is running desperately to escape. The enormous demon appears behind the protagonist. He runs with a terrified expression. He notices something ahead of him. He sees that there is a mother and daughter ahead. The woman has a stone over her. The mother has an injured leg. Both are visibly in shock. He says that normally anyone would run away. Even he still has many things he wants to do in life. He thinks, but, and widens his eyes. He says he has two beliefs and runs to shield the girl and woman. He thinks that one must never abandon someone in need. He says that mothers must always be valued, even if they are not one's own. The demon stares at him with glowing eyes, while the protagonist stands with his back turned, facing the demon. He says, honestly, right after, he questions how it happened. He wonders if he should escape the situation while the mother and the child appear frightened. The screen says, System Reboot. The action of restarting a system is confirmed. It then announces RAID Functionality Expansion. Next, it informs that the Functionality Expansion Protocol is active. The system makes an important announcement to all members of the NWO Corporation. It seeks to inform everyone at once. She says that since the Foundation, they foresaw the situation. A man watches her and shows a photo on the phone and talks about a new system they are preparing. She is informed that her points will be converted into combat power. She reacts with surprise. The protagonist expresses surprise and questions the combat power. The demon advances to attack. He tries to punch the protagonist with force. He says that the points have been converted into combat power. He asks what he should do with it. The system informs that the message is from the NWD Corporation. It continues by saying that it is an important announcement for all members. She asks if anyone has the points card with them. Her gaze is hopeful, and her hands are clasped together. It is said, to all RAID members, or rather, someone states, survivors. Several characters observe screens with silhouettes of people. The person seems surprised by a hologram in the room. The system announces that the tutorial for the combat power conversion system will begin. The character looks surprised at the message while playing. She says that the points she has will be used. These points can improve her attributes or acquire weapons, and explains that the stats are divided into 6 categories, and that the player can improve whatever they prefer. Finally, she says to create their favorite combat style. She observes that each category has a maximum limit of 100, and that it costs 10,000 rupiah to increase by 1 meter. She sees the HP bars at levels 10 and 11 and an indication of 10,000 rupiah consumption. The system presents a variety of weapons, from swords to firearms and bows. He also has abilities that include physical enhancement, attack magic, and healing, along with support. The customization options are very diverse. She explains that skills and weapons require more AP depending on their power and utility. She details examples of AP costs, such as Fireball, which costs 15,000, Cherry Blossom Dance, which costs 20,000, Small Heal, which costs 6,000, and Flame Fang, which costs 50,000, and shows that ultimate skills are particularly powerful and that they can be purchased for 1 million AP each. The system announces that the tutorial ends. Then it suggests visiting the website in case of doubts. Character remains motionless. The protagonist yells in anger, saying he has no time to listen to explanations. He says it's serious and that he's going to die. A strike comes down at high speed in the protagonist's direction. Carrying both on his back, he says that first, no matter what it takes, he is determined to protect her. They run while the protagonist says they need to evacuate to a safe place. He continues carrying both on his back as they flee from a giant red creature. Next, we see the headquarters of the NWO Corporation. A man with his back turned watches monitors displaying images of powerful creatures. He seems to be in a control center, and the situation appears tense. The guy says, "So it has begun," with a worried expression. What he was talking about seemed inevitable. He was holding a shining pendant in his hand. Then, he said he held the shining pendant. Then, he said to fulfill the promise. At 3:32, the monster in Shinjuku is struck by a bright explosion near its arm. People ask how many points he has. He replies that it's only about 1,500 yen worth. And he complains that weapons and abilities are too expensive. Even the simplest wooden item costs 3,000 RP. At this rate, he can't buy anything or improve his stats. A guy saw something and was surprised. He realized he could buy fireball magic, and he thinks, "Good thing I bought the gaming PC at the festival." Then he challenges the big monster. His hands catch fire, indicating the activation of a skill. He yells, "Come on!" and fireball, and uses his magic. The other guy spotted something small and blue up high. He commented that it was tiny. Soon, he thought his attack wasn't strong enough. The group, in terror, feels a strong impact, and they are crushed, realizing it's a no-win game. It's an inevitable end. In the destroyed city, a giant monster roared loudly. The sound echoed through the ruins of the city. The dark creature loomed over the shattered buildings. Protagonist carries the woman on his back while the girl follows. They look exhausted. He says that if they made it this far, they should be safe. The little girl asks if her brother is okay. Then, the mother apologizes for causing trouble. The protagonist says there's no problem at all. He claims he only did what anyone would do. He comments about monsters and portals in the sky. The situation seems tense. He thinks about the conversion of combat power into points. He questioned what was happening in this world. He screams, realizing something with wide eyes. His face shows panic and urgency. He asks about Kyoko, showing concern for her. The protagonist is on the phone and talks about the chaos. He hopes to reach her. The girl asks her older brother through the phone. He says that Kyoko is safe, while the girl responds that he is speaking too loudly. The protagonist is on the phone crying with relief. He asks where the other person is now. The girl said she was fine and had evacuated to the local gym. He replied that he saw and that he was happy to know she was safe, but he speaks on the phone, asking them to listen to him. He orders them not to move until it is over. The girl asks her older brother if he is okay, and if he risked his life to help others again. He feels uncomfortable on the phone and tells his sister not to leave there until he arrives. He checks on his phone for confirmation that Kyoko is safe. Then he thinks that he needs to take mother and daughter to safety now. The voice asked if he desired power. The character was surprised by the question. He hears the mysterious voice and asks where it is coming from. Soon, the voice responds, "Here, here." The protagonist is startled and questions whether that came from his wallet. He takes a black card from his wallet. The voice from the card asks if the protagonist desires power. The voice insists, calling him an idiot. He gets startled. He asks if the points card is talking. The card claims it always meant to say, honky moving. The card asks if he is Asahi Sota. He asks to be called Ivy and says he will be his partner, taking care of his battles and point-related needs. The protagonist says a talking card is scary, but the card retorts that it has the right to self-awareness and speech, and that cards also deserve rights. It finally says that it's better to use the points to improve stats or acquire skills. It continues the sentence with an implicit threat. A giant monster appears, threatening the protagonist, stating that he and his family will die. Child calls for mother, then says they are scared. The protagonist exclaims in surprise. An irritated voice asks what he is going to do and urges him to hurry up and decide. The voice states that with 8.46 million rupiah, he can save the entire city. Sota tells it not to make it sound so easy. He seems stressed. He remembers that those were the points, as the woman hands him the card. After some time in the same place, he says he has been saving up for 10 years. Sota visits RAID point partner stores come rain or shine. Moreover, he offers his card when his friends are shopping. He answered countless surveys from unknown companies just to earn points, and played mobile games non-stop. Then he ordered to dodge and advance. That was the crystallization of blood, sweat, and tears. He shouts that they are asking him to give that up. He finds it very cruel, as he has invested many points in this. Ivy says that with the points, he could maximize his stats. He has 8,460,740 RP. He can buy a powerful ultimate skill and still have points left. The protagonist yells that he doesn't care and calls for ma'am and young lady. He orders the mother and the girl to stay put. The ground seems to tremble from the force of the command. He says he will distract the monster and seems ready to act. He runs to the main road to draw attention away. The card yells at him not to do that. The protagonist draws the creature's attention to himself. He states that he will not spend points on himself, but the card warns that he will truly die. The creature screams loudly and uses its tail. The protagonist is shocked and scared. He is hit in the chest and blood gushes out, with the card screaming for Sota. Hit in the chest and bleeding. Scared, child calls for the protagonist, and the mother hugs her. The creature leaves the protagonist almost dead on the ground. Sota screams in pain on the ground, badly hurt and bleeding. He tries to take a deep breath, but someone tells him to be quiet and calm down. He sees his hand bleeding and thinks that this may really be his end, and feels that his internal organs are completely destroyed, and that he can see death taking shape and approaching. He moans in pain. He sees death approaching. A giant skull with horns appears. He bleeds from his mouth and feels a lot of pain. But somehow it is warm. He sees his parents in heaven. They are smiling at him. He is crying and calling for his father and mother with tears streaming down his eyes. Sota asks if he was a good older brother and asks if he did something for Kyoko. He says he understands. Sota replies that he will join them soon. The card yells at him to wait a second and warns him not to die now. She yells at him to pull himself together. She keeps yelling at him to press the fourth option from the top. She explains that it is a recovery skill that will heal the giant hole in his stomach. He thinks the card slapped him. Continuing, he finally presses the recovery button and says he understands and that she is too loud. He complains that he is almost dying and asks her to stop yelling. And then a purchase complete message appears, thanking him for the transaction and informing him that the use should already be recorded in his brain. Sota activates the skill. He is injured and bleeding. He asks if it will really heal him. He uses the skill Super Recovery and exclaims in surprise that buying the skill allows him to use it instinctively and feels life flowing back into him, saying that he was on the verge of death and it seems like a lie. It's as if everything was a mistake. Sota realizes that the hole in his stomach has completely healed. He says it's amazing and that he doesn't feel any pain. He continues in surprise, asking for a second to process what he sees. He expresses complete disbelief at the situation. The card laughs while Sota cries when he sees the purchase history. He realizes that he spent 30,000 rupiah on super recovery. He cries and yells at the card. He accuses it of wasting its points when it was almost dead. The card complains to Sota not to pull it so hard. Meanwhile, the card yells that by taking too long, both mother and daughter will be eaten. The card yells to hurry up and use the points to improve stats or get skills. Sota, frightened, hears the card tell him to hurry up and use the points to improve. He hesitates to use the points even in the current situation and begins to hate himself for it. Points are no substitute for a life. Even so, but the card remembered to mention that Sota can also earn points by defeating monsters. The card sees the creature and comments that, by the looks of it, it is a boss monster of A to B rank gate, and says that it must be worth no less than 100,000 ORP. He evaluates the value of the creature. He runs very fast. He seems very determined to keep running. He shouts for Ivy. He tells him to put all the points into stats, and says that he has 2 rules. The first is to never hesitate to invest in advance, and the second, never let things end with him being defeated. Ivy continues, saying that great, the person is super awesome now. He states that points are worthless when saved. Then he decides to maximize the person's stats. Ivy maximizes Sota Asahi's stats. The numbers rise drastically. HP, MP, attack, speed, skill, and defense reach their limits. Muscles begin to grow. Each step is destructive. Steps shatter the screen. The RP value reaches 2,430,740. The protagonist tells them not to cry, calling it an investment. He believes that defeating monsters will soon bring the points back. And he says that the most important thing is to save the family in front of him. He states that if he gets stronger, he will be able to protect Kyoko as well. He cries, but he is determined to grow stronger. He questions the value of 10 years of points, blood, sweat, and tears. He sends it all to hell. An explosion erupts, echoing the protagonist's rage as he sends everything to hell because he jumped. He realizes he has jumped incredibly far. He is astonished by the leap. The protagonist feels his body absurdly light. They explain that his stats are maxed out. He is a level 99 superpower. The card states that with the protagonist's strength and speed, almost nothing in this world can match him. Protagonist plummets at high speed. With his level 99 strength, this fall is nothing to him. The monster barely has time to react. It is stunned by the light and the protagonist's strike. The protagonist's blow lands on the red creature's face. The impact is strong and luminous against the demonic visage. The creature releases the mother and child. The protagonist notices this. They scream as they fall. They cry out in despair, trying to reach each other. He rushes toward them and manages to catch them before they hit the ground. He lands safely. The woman cries and thanks him profusely for landing them safely. The protagonist, crying, says it was the least he could do. Meanwhile, the card tells him not to count the points he lost. But at that moment, the demon returns. He says this is really tough, while Ivy agrees, affirming that it is a high-level monster. She says that if the protagonist had a supreme skill, it would be easy to defeat the monster. He then asks about the supreme skill. The card explains that it grants power incomparable to normal skills. It is a literal supreme ability that surpasses human limits. With it, one can purchase some and farm points more efficiently. She asks what the protagonist thinks of the offer and says it sounds like a good deal, then invites him to try it. A massive monster roars in the burning, destroyed city. Smoke covers the sky, and the destruction is total. An emergency is declared due to giant monsters. The message is broadcast over loudspeakers. The loudspeakers warn residents to avoid going outside. They urge them to take shelter indoors or evacuate. A father and his children hold each other in fear. The situation is uncontrolled. They urge people not to leave their homes under any circumstances. The protagonist speaks of a certain supreme skill and questions whether she can really be trusted upon seeing the destruction. Ivy says it will cost 1 million rupiah. He exclaims that it's expensive. The system displays 2,430,740 rupiah. Then he screams in frustration and decides to buy a skill quickly. He says there's no time to choose and asks them to pick something good for him. The card analyzes Entele's status and says that this skill might be good. Entele says that if it's strong, it doesn't matter what it is and orders to buy it. The purchase was made, spending 1 million rupiah and leaving 1,430,740 rupiah remaining. Meanwhile, the giant creature roars. The protagonist realizes something and exclaims that the method of use is flowing into his head. He seems to understand everything now. He jumps toward the red target with determination. He looks confident and ready to act now, and runs on top of it. He says to test this so-called supreme skill. He activates the supreme skill and says, "Whim of the Forge God," to use its power. The system details the supreme skill. It consumes MP to convert inorganic materials that are touched. The system details the supreme skill. It consumes MP to convert inorganic materials that are touched. He transforms materials into weapons and says, "Into weapons." His hands turn into rubble cestus. The card says that with this supreme skill, there is no limit to weapons. It continues saying that he doesn't need to carry weapons all the time. Everything can be obtained locally. He jumps using the monster itself as a trampoline. She says that with maxed out stats, he can use both physical and imaginative powers. He uses the ultimate skill and shouts that this is the best absolute skill. He talks about that power and asks if it's real. The protagonist lands with a massive impact. He realizes that even magically reinforced, the durability is insufficient and expresses concern about the situation. The protagonist notices the immense creature. He exclaims in frustration at the situation. The magical durability seems useless, and that it is ridiculously resistant. But he understands the way now. Its effectiveness, which is worth 1 million RP, depends entirely on how he uses it. The protagonist activates Whim of the Forge God. A sign is hit. The skill is used, and he transforms a traffic sign into an axe. He says to finish it once and for all, while Ivy agrees to step and crush. He attacks to finish with his spear. The creature reacts with a furious roar. He attacks with the spear to finish it off for good. The quick strike seems decisive. The creature screams in pain. The spear attack seems to have landed. A simultaneous invasion of extra-dimensional creatures occurred worldwide. An unprecedented crisis left humanity defenseless. In crisis, humans see a common young man, nothing special about him. His vision emerges amid the chaos. The TV reports a young man fighting equally or even better against a massive monster. The global crisis watches with hope. The young man keeps fighting the monster. He screams. Shot then uses his sword, made from that sign he found in the middle of the street. And with that sword, he easily managed to make a dimensional cut, piercing the monster with a determined look. He realizes that now it's all over. Then, Shot turns around and sees only the damage, the entire city destroyed, but the monster he managed to defeat. Minutes later, the system appears, celebrating having managed to defeat the monster, and for that, he won. And for that, he won 130,000 rupiah. However, after all this, he realizes that now he is a little lighter, and he also doesn't feel very tired, thanking the incredible support of the wallet. Still thinking about what he should do, he remembers that family. So, he runs and wonders if, by chance, they were okay. The girl answers that she was completely fine as soon as she approached. He starts to wonder, what should we do? He can't stay here any longer. The girl's mother ends up asking him not to worry since he has already done a lot for them. Without knowing the answer, the card appears in his ear, commenting that he could be taking the points he has and could be buying a teleportation skill, which could teleport him, what he was holding with him, to a place he wants. At this moment, then, he turns to the card and wonders if he could really buy this. The card says yes, and without wasting any time, he opens the system screen and realizes that he should buy this skill, since he needs to go to Kyoto, and without a doubt, this skill will be very useful for him. So our protagonist starts to spend 500,000 RP. The card, seeing so much RP entering its account, clearly thanks the protagonist for spending like crazy. Our hero tells him to relax, because what he bought was something he will use a lot, and this skill would not be completely unnecessary. Meanwhile, he approaches the family and wonders if they were okay like this. The girl's mother ends up saying that her husband was in a gym near where they were. Our protagonist even celebrates because his sister was in that same gym, so he could be teleporting there. However, the system wanted to guide him. It ends up telling him that in order to teleport there, he had to open the map first. He already knew that, so he looks for our school. After searching for a long time on that map, he ends up finding it. As soon as he finds it, he activates that ability, and the instant teleportation is activated. As soon as he finds it, he opens his eyes, and at that moment, an aura ends up appearing, leaving our protagonist surprised with this new ability, and his body seemed to disappear. Minutes later, he is sent to the gym. Inside the gym, he now celebrates with this new ability that he has. That was incredible. Now with this ability, he will never be late for any type of work. But at the moment that he appears there, people get scared. At that moment, even his wallet appears saying that he was an idiot for showing up there in the middle of nowhere. He apologizes. However, someone appears, calling for that thing. This was the husband of that girl's mother. So they approach and hug. After that, he turns around and cries, "Thanks our protagonist for having basically saved his family's life." So our protagonist doesn't even react at all. He doesn't believe in the good deed he did, but he hears his sister's voice calling for him. Seeing her, the protagonist calls for Yoko and then approaches and ends up saying that it took a long time, but he arrived. But he hugs her a little tighter. However, now she starts showing a cell phone and shows some important things, that a certain hero appeared and that this hero fought some monsters and won. After a while, he explains everything that happened. She understands that, little by little, he starts to collect points. And with these points, he could be gaining skills with it. Before the fight started, she even thought it was, I don't know, someone else. But anyway, she ends up appearing with some clothes and then asked him to change them. He thanks her, but before he can get those clothes, he feels a huge pressure and wonders what was going on. Then outside that school, we see two guards standing still and shaking with fear. They look up and end up wondering what brought them to this situation where they find themselves. They end up facing several giant monsters. These giant monsters here, for sure, will be breaking this shelter, and this shelter, it won't last for long. Now at the CEO Corporation, we find it, calling the AI. It then appears and asks, "How is the situation going?" It reveals that all this event has already happened about 3 hours since the disappearance of the portals in this world. And because of that, monsters appeared and the damage happened. But at this moment, these people who found themselves in the middle of all this chaos, some of them were lucky. These people ended up awakening powers, and these powers go far beyond human comprehension, and the CEO then celebrates. Then he is happy to see that everyone liked the gift he gave everyone, for sure. All this destruction that happened will lead this world to brutal growth. Then, it is revealed to us who Regime is, the owner of all this that happened in this world. But now, the scene returns to the group of those two guards who are still looking at these gigantic monsters, and inside the shelter, we can now see our protagonist scared and starting to wonder if it was a monster again, and then we see the mother crying while hugging her son. Meanwhile, outside, the guards think that even if they did everything, they wouldn't be able to evacuate everyone, and now everything seems to be over. The monsters slowly advance towards them. However, the guards end up being interrupted by some other people who were in the shelter. They used some points, and with these points, they ended up gaining some skills, and with these skills, they will be able to survive all of this, clearly leaving the guards completely happy. Now, for sure, they will be surviving all of this. Meanwhile, we then observe their malice. They basically reveal themselves as someone who was looking for happiness, and they end up finding a certain place that was interesting. They also thank the corporation for basically having left so many points for them. As soon as they defeat these monsters, they will make this place where they are their fortress. All the people inside will be kneeling before them. Their orders will be completely followed. And so, he orders the people who are here to clean up, destroy all of these monsters. The next moment then, all of the people start running towards the monsters that are in front of them. The monsters were very large. Meanwhile, inside the secure base, we observed the damage happening. The people who were fighting outside couldn't hold off the monsters very well, because one of these monsters managed to break the roof, which ended up allowing them to see what was happening inside. The protagonist's sister only thinks of one thing, that now they need to run. But before that, she turns to her brother and asks if he's okay. Then, looking at him, she realizes that he was kind of getting ready for something. Only now he ends up saying that it was his turn to act. Meanwhile, the card appears and says that there's no need to worry. The protagonist's sister, he will do her the favor of protecting her, but when he speaks there, she is surprised to see that the card was talking. But the monster that found the humans who were trapped inside the place becomes more curious, so he uses his claw to open everything, and at that moment, by doing so, he ended up opening a crack in the ceiling, which ended up allowing some debris to fall on top of them. But before he can basically fall on top of them, our protagonist activates one of his ultimate abilities, and now he activates the skill's quirk, and at this moment, he manages to hold on for a bit, but in the meantime, the scene cuts to another location and we meet those adventurers who ventured there a little earlier, in an attempt to face the dead. But looking forward now, he doesn't. He believes. What he saw was impossible. Those strong comrades of his had been completely devoured and killed by those monsters, and now he was the only one left alive. In this situation, he wonders what he could do. Until then, he hears a noise coming from there, inside that shelter. And at that point, he turns to see what was happening, until he sees our protagonist, who is now holding a slightly more powerful sledgehammer. From afar, we see our protagonist screaming. Then he picks up that sledgehammer he had and hits the monster. With just one blow, he manages to kill it. But in the meantime, we see that adventurer from before, surprised by our hero's skill and strength. But our protagonist from there, he jumps to the ground, near this guy who was over here. Now, close to him, he ends up being kind of surprised to see that our protagonist has changed a lot. To see that he was no longer like that guy who was working part-time. So, he responds that a lot of things have happened, but now he doesn't have time to talk to this guy. He says that there were 3 monsters in front of him, and there were only 3 left to finish them off. However, this guy says that all his people did everything they could, but in the end, they didn't get anything. And now, he no longer believes that he can't deal with these monsters anymore. Staying here would mean death, and also, if he moved forward, he would only end up becoming a meal for these monsters. On the other hand, our protagonist crouches down and says that this guy hasn't changed at all. So he just asks this guy to stay back and not get in his way. And after saying something like that, he jumps up, leaving the guy completely surprised. He doesn't believe it. He's really going to go forward. Then, from above, we see our protagonist staring at one of the 3 monsters. Up high now, he starts to think that he's been thinking about this for a long time, about how he's turning rubber into bullets to take down those bullies. Or in the end, transform a blackboard into a weapon to knock out teachers he hated in class, or transform a branch into an extremely powerful sword. And in the end, he got his answer. He was now able to do what he had wanted so much since childhood. At this moment, he picks up what he was holding and puts an aura on it. After that, he advances towards the beast, and with a few small movements, he managed to kill this monster with a few blows. This didn't even last 30 minutes. He managed to take down everything on his own. Now it was his turn, and so he advances, destroying the first monster. But another one appears. This one, which looked more like Godzilla, activates a damper, and that damper goes towards the protagonist. At this moment, he was happy because now was the time to test what he had wanted so much to do since he was a child. So, at this moment, he activates the whim of the forge. After activating this ability, the forge begins to forge something that our protagonist wanted. It's like a cannon. After placing the cannon in his hand, he aims it at the monster. After that, he fires a blow. At this point, Godzilla's muffled attack ends up being interrupted by our hero's bullet. However, to defeat the boss in one go, he screams loudly, and after that, we only see our hero's power advancing and causing a gigantic explosion. We see it from a long distance, but after everything that happened, the scene then goes back to him. He then approaches that guy and gives him a job, but at this point, he ends up saying that he can now survive with his power. And now he ends up saying that he will be quitting his own job. He no longer wants the job that he gave him. After losing that job, we see the happy face of someone who no longer wants to work. And then, that adventurer falls to the ground. Not believing anything that happened, but at that moment, journalists appear right behind that adventurer and start asking him a lot of questions, and end up seeing firsthand everything that happened in his life. And he wanted to know about these things, something that will give him a very good reputation. And then, we see there, the journalist commenting that now on the internet, the protagonist was considered the hero of the whole world. So, the journalist starts to wonder what he did to get these special abilities, but he tells him to shut up. However, while all this is happening, we see the protagonist's sister approaching from behind. But now, looking at the protagonist's sister realizes that now he has changed. Now it seems that he is no longer of this world. He has become something completely different from her. But the most important thing for her is whether the protagonist will really leave them, since that black card says that he won't. She didn't need to worry so much about that, since that one, he wouldn't be going anywhere. And also, that boy, for her, really became strong. So, summarizing the mind a little more there, he just asks her to relax. But here, time passes. A month later, we see the newspaper there, commenting that it's been a month, that crisis has already appeared in the world. The government didn't manage to prevent it very well, but some things appeared to prevent all of this from continuing. Since now, here in the world, heroes appeared. They are basically risking their lives to protect the weakest. That's how they managed to survive all this chaos. And so with only those heroes, they also managed to make the weakest, the common people, evacuate. And in the end, the governments also decided to create something called hero associations. And there they basically won, something called ranking. Each ranking will give you a good position, which is also good in the end. It will give you the chance to defeat monsters. Defeating very strong monsters would also give you very good rewards after doing such a feat. However, in the end, we see the protagonist's sister. In the end, she didn't awaken a single skill. However, those who awaken skills are on missions every day, and his brother is working very hard every day. He left a letter behind saying he was training. In another place, we see the protagonist training on a machine. He punched it with the aim of destroying it, with his fist and full strength. And yet in the end, with just one punch, he ends up punching that mannequin, gaining some strength points in it. But by doing so, he ends up gaining 20,000 RP. After a good amount of training, we now see that he can fight even better now in fights. But on the other hand, we see the card saying that fighting or training was too slow. There's no reason to buy skills. And to that, he responds that it would be a waste of RP. Training and learning defensively was much more effective. After he got a little stronger, only the magnitude didn't change, not even a little. And all this happened. Behind then, we see someone sending a message. But now, back to the protagonist, who here comments that, in these last days, he ended up hunting 23 monsters due to the nature of the whim of the gods of the forge. Imagining weapons during training is very crucial, but real combat is still much better. Also, the best way to get good weapons. And that said, even after hunting 23 monsters, he didn't recover, not even the beginning of the RP that he spent on this card. While all this was happening, the card goes to the cell phone and realizes that on the cell phone, a warning appeared that monsters are appearing in the middle of the city. Then, realizing that something is happening, the scene changes to the city center. Meanwhile, observing inside the store, this girl buying clothes, she comments that a portal appeared nearby. The saleswoman tells her not to worry about it because no monsters would appear there. But then the scene cuts to another location. Goblins are attacking certain people. These certain people had no way to escape. One of them unfortunately died, and everything continues, with the system telling the people who survived to go to a safe place, which was nearby. Meanwhile, we see a goblin being mean to a girl, but before he can do anything, an adventurer appears. And after this adventurer appears, he punches this goblin in the face. After delivering this punch, he makes this goblin be thrown back a little. After taking down one of these goblins, he realizes that this monster was very weak. He wonders if there isn't another strong monster. By then, the girl realizes who this guy is. He was a pretty high ranking, but right next door, that girl who was in love with him was the protagonist's ex-girlfriend. However, he isn't satisfied with taking down a few goblins, so he keeps taking down others, and so on, taking down others. Meanwhile, this hunter's ex continues to praise this guy. So after taking down a few goblins, he wonders if there aren't other stronger monsters. Until then, one appears. After appearing, he punches this adventurer in the face. After landing a punch right in his face, he is thrown back. After being thrown back, he is knocked down. Let's say the king of the goblins appears in front of the girl, and here he is introduced as a C-rank monster. The girl, unable to defend herself, ends up being grabbed by this monster and ends up being licked by it in the end. While she was in this terrible situation, she simply wondered if there was someone who could save her. But the scene changes to another location, and we find the protagonist screaming. Minutes later, he lands a direct hit on that monster. And, after doing so, he asks the young lady to stay behind. She does. Meanwhile, we see the protagonist moving quickly there, with that thing he created from the system. After moving forward for a while, he ends up letting go of it, and then apologizes for the vegetables he left in that cart. After letting it go a little forward, an explosion occurs, blowing up the monsters. But there was still a monster behind, which tried to get him from behind. So, he activates that creation ability, making the bread that was in his hand turn into a sword. And then, with a single cut, he completely knocks down those goblins that were alive. But still, there were goblins in front that were still alive. To do this, he activates another skill. And after that, he just runs and, well, cuts down all the monsters. Yuka. She was a 21-year-old girl and had dated 18 men so far. But at this point, she would never regret cheating on the men she dated. But now she regrets it. Well, and in today's story, the protagonist continues preparing himself there after the protagonist managed to defeat some goblins. But before continuing, I wanted to reiterate something that I ended up saying in the previous video. In the previous video, I mentioned that this would be the protagonist's ex-girlfriend, but that wasn't exactly it. In fact, this was the hero's ex-girlfriend, not the protagonist's. But continuing with the video, we find the protagonist after beating up those goblins. From the top of those defeated monsters, he appears on top, eating a piece of bread that he used to defeat the monsters. After eating the bread, he tastes blood. The cartel told him not to eat it, but he felt sorry for the baker at that moment. He managed to defeat 100 monsters, so that ended up giving him some good points. The system appears there, showing that he earned 200 points for defeating those monsters. But it also seems that defeating goblins doesn't change much, so for him, it wasn't worth fighting those weak monsters. Meanwhile, this girl just wanted to talk to him, but in the end she realizes that he still hasn't noticed her presence in this place. But the next day, in the Prime Minister's office, we see that a very important meeting will be taking place there. Here we find the Prime Minister, who is better known as Kiyohoru, who then prepares to speak. Someone was hiding in the closet. He carefully peeked through a crack and saw a person lying on the floor, apparently lifeless. This hidden person was our protagonist. The boy was trembling and horrified. Meanwhile, he hugged his little sister so she wouldn't see what he had just witnessed. The sounds of a man killing a person echoed through the room. The psychopath held a blade, and with its help, pierced the body of the victim who was in front of him several times. Meanwhile, the red-eyed killer screamed with pure hatred that he was going to end everything and everyone's lives. The green-haired, red-eyed guy was completely out of control. At the height of his fury, he shouted to the other man, who was already lifeless, that he was not a pitiful being like everyone always said. In the next scene, a young man wakes up from a nightmare, screaming, breathing heavily and terrified. Still gasping for air, our protagonist sits up in bed, trying to understand what all that was about. Suddenly, a sweet girl bursts into Soda's room, very worried. It was the protagonist's little sister. Upon seeing her brother's situation, she asks if he had another nightmare about that dark day, and if he needed anything. Still out of breath, the boy calms his sister down, saying that he was fine and that she didn't need to worry. The young man lies to the girl, saying that he dreamed that he was being devoured by a giant snake, one of the recurring dreams that he always had nothing to worry about. The sweet young woman just stares at her brother, not knowing how to help him. The girl knew that something was wrong, but Kota didn't want to worry her, so he just made up a story. After the scare, the brothers get ready to have breakfast. While they were both having breakfast, the TV next to him turns on. An emergency conference caught their attention and was also being broadcast throughout Japan. It was an announcement from Minister Shishiyama Rigaroing about the portals and beings from the other world that were now invading and destroying the entire planet. The man was serious. After a brief moment of silence, he cleared his throat and thus began the conference. This emergency broadcast was to clarify what the government would do with the portals that appeared on September 10th. Shishiyama revealed that the entire nation has been working hard and studying the measures that will be taken to help the citizens who lost their homes, and also measures to protect the entire population against the attacks of the monsters that have already taken the lives of countless people. The minister explains that everything would begin with the formation of the special forces against otherworldly beings, all of which had previously been carefully planned by the U.S. government. And now it would be one of the tactics that would also be used by Japan. China, Russia, and even France have also formed state-sponsored guilds recruiting survivors, all aiming to successfully reduce the damage caused by the otherworldly beings and reduce or even eliminate the number of victims resulting from the countless attacks carried out by the monsters. While foreign nations were conquering these portals at lightning speed, it was truly unfortunate to say that Japan, among all the developed nations, was advancing at a snail's pace. At this rate, Japan's standing in the international community would also be at risk, and everyone would become a laughingstock if anyone survived the countless attacks. Shishiyama reveals that the country would begin to gather elite survivors from both the public and private sectors in order to establish an official government survival guild. The future master of the guild, the powerful warrior who would lead this entire operation, had already been handpicked by Shishiyama himself, so the man points to the door behind everyone and asks this honorable and skilled warrior to show his face. An imposing figure appears, calling Shishiyama an old man. Everyone present at the conference is shocked and surprised by the warrior's actions. This surprise did not come from the warrior's lack of manners. Well, in fact, it was. The majestic warrior enters the room wearing only a small towel to hide his important documents. Shishiyama is shocked by the boy's audacity. He could hardly have imagined that the warrior would show up wearing only a tiny cloth while being broadcast on the entire national network to the entire population. The brothers who were watching the emergency conference were bewildered by this Ilrian figure. In desperation, Shishiyama points his index finger at the man now responsible for the future of the entire nation and asks what he was wearing. The man warns the young warrior that this was not a bodybuilding event, but an official government event, and he should be dressed appropriately. All smiles, the bodybuilder boy says that he took down a Class A monster a few moments ago, and that showing up like this was appropriate enough. After all, he wasn't late or anything. The young warrior says that he got a little dirty while finishing off the creature, so he had to take a quick shower, and in the end his clothes were too dirty for him to wear to the event. That young man was an S-class warrior named Shishiyama Kaoru, and also Shishiyama's son. At this point in the game, There was nothing more the old man could do to fix the situation. So still quite disoriented and with a stomachache from the surprise his son had given him, Shishiyama tells the boy to give his quick speech and get out of there as soon as possible. Seconds later, Kaoru hugs his father and introduces himself as the son of the Prime Minister. The young man didn't even have a speech prepared. He just said that he would work alongside the old man to eradicate all the monsters and protect the entire population. While everyone couldn't take their eyes off the warrior's mini-towel, Kaoru reveals that he would be responsible for eliminating the monsters and also for managing the entire guild, that everything was under control. At the end of the broadcast, Kaoru says that it was a pleasure to meet everyone and that he would do his best. In parallel, Kota, our protagonist, points out that the Prime Minister's errant son was back in Japan. The protagonist's sister remembers that it was announced that Kaoru was traveling the world doing volunteer work, and she asks her brother about it. Our boy, a little worried, says that in theory that was true, but the minister probably just wanted to hide his son, but now he had to use his strength whether he wanted to or not. Suddenly, the boy's attention turns to his cell phone. It was announced that another portal had appeared around the elementary school. Without delay, Kota grabs his jacket and tells his little sister that he needs to leave because a portal has just appeared and he needs to act quickly. The girl gets worried, the protagonist never rests, and in the last few days, Kota has always run away as soon as one of these portals appears. Our boy just looks back with a smile, saying that this portal was no big deal. He would finish everything quickly and return safely soon. It was a promise, and he would not break it. This leaves the protagonist's sister speechless. The young girl could do nothing but trust her brother Kota's words. Amidst the chaos that hung over the city, a helicopter flew over the area where the portal appeared. The portal was Class B, and it appeared right in the middle of the elementary school in Saitama City. Much of the school was destroyed and it's hard to tell just by flying over the region if there were any survivors in that place. An alert sounds and orders all residents to evacuate the place immediately before more victims appear. At the elementary school, a teacher was trying to contain all the confusion and control the students. The students should go to the gym so they could be evacuated safely. In the next scene, something scares the teacher. Something, or rather, a creature, was destroying the windows right in front of him. Soon, everyone would be attacked by a monster. They needed to get away from there. A purple gelatinous creature of Class B entered the school, tearing the windows as if they were made of paper. Upon hearing the students' screams, it marked them as its targets. All the students went into despair as the gelatinous monster opened its enormous mouth to devour the teacher with just one fatal bite. Luckily, someone blocked the creature's path at the last moment. It was our boy Sota playing the hero. With his determined look, the protagonist stared at the teacher and told him to get all the children out of there safely. The boy's ability, called Forge God's Whim, is reactivated. A red shield appears in the boy's hands and the young man blocks the creature's attack in time. Our protagonist analyzes that the monster was just a Class B monster. Kota just needed to finish off the creature quickly, collect his points, and get out of there. However, something unexpected happens. When it hits the boy's shield, the gelatinous creature splits in two and passes by our hero without difficulty, sneaking towards the teacher and his students. The protagonist's scorecard calls him an idiot. And at that moment, the boy's shield begins to be swallowed by the beast. The scorecard reveals that the monster was a slime. They were fluid creatures, and the boy needed to destroy their core in order to defeat them. Physical attacks do not work on that monster's body. The scorecard also warns that if the slime swallows him, it will be the end. Kota will be defeated. At that moment, the monster has already devoured the teacher's body, who is now completely unconscious. Several other students have also been devoured and are just waiting for their end. The boy's scorecard warned him that if he continued like this, everyone would be slowly and continuously dissolved, and that the teacher and the captured students would be transformed into nutrients for the creature. At that moment, Our protagonist had also been swallowed and was trapped inside the slime's body, ready to become another one of its nutrients. The boy couldn't move, even though he was still conscious. Kota was being swallowed by the creature. The slime kept moving to devour its other prey while our boy remained motionless inside his body, not knowing how he would be able to get out of that situation. Kota thought that if he could swing his armor frantically, he would be able to free himself. But in that tight space, the children who were also captured and were very close to him would be caught in the crossfire. Seconds later, our warrior began to run out of air, unable to breathe. His consciousness began to fade. However, Kota tried to keep his eyes open. The protagonist needed to find a way to get everyone out of the body of that damned slime. Even after this thought, the boy couldn't do anything. With his eyes already losing the shine of life, our protagonist thinks about his sister, Kyoko. He remembers his promise and that he said he would be back soon. Kota thinks he couldn't break his promise. Luckily, a mysterious savior with long black hair and glasses on his face took action, destroying the creature's entire purple gelatinous body with just one movement. The part of the slime's body that was imprisoning its victims was completely destroyed, and the head, or rather, what was left of the gelatinous creature, was thrown away. Back to himself and already conscious, with his breathing still heavy, our boy faced the mysterious warrior with curiosity. He had no idea what had just happened and what his situation was. After all, while he was trying to escape, our boy lost consciousness. Even if it was for a moment, Kota had no idea what had happened while he was out. The other victims also regained consciousness, but no one was able to get up yet because they were dizzy and, like the protagonist, they were trying to understand their current situation. In the background, but in front of all the victims, was the mysterious warrior, or rather a young and beautiful woman with long dark hair and beautiful drawn curves. Sota had a privileged view of the entire situation. He didn't know what really happened, but given the imposing presence of that girl, she was probably the person who saved everyone. The woman looks back, checking the situation of the victims, and also glances at our protagonist. At that moment, a dense blue aura ran through the entire body of that mysterious warrior. The young woman didn't even seem tired. After all, she didn't make much effort. That was a measly B-level slime, an insignificant creature that didn't require much effort to be defeated. Sota was perplexed and couldn't believe what had happened. That sticky and problematic slime was eliminated in just an instant, without difficulty, as if it were a measly ant. The protagonist wonders internally, who could that powerful woman be? Kota's scorecard was already stressed by the boy's lack of tact. He yells at Kota and tells the damn thing to at least check the survivor ranking. Kota just stared at his irritated friend still on the ground, without even knowing about the survivor ranking cited by the system. The scorecard points out that that mysterious warrior was one of the only 5 S-class survivors in Japan. Someone who was worth remembering. Her code name, or rather hero name, was the Crimson Single Mother. After saving everyone, the Crimson Single Mother warrior begins to stare at the survivors with a threatening look. Since everyone was still sitting on the floor, seeing her staring at the students from above made the situation even more threatening. The students quickly hid. Behind the teacher, everyone was shaking and very scared of what that woman could do to them. The teacher was also terrified by that woman's intimidating gaze, but he still followed his role as Teacher of the Year and tried to protect all the students even if it could cost him his life. Out of nowhere, the Crimson Single Mother warrior lets out a huge smile, and the entire aura around her becomes welcoming. She says that everyone must have been scared by the monster's attack. She calms them down and says that now everything is under control, and that no one will be hurt. She even calls herself Mommy, and says that she has finished off the evil creature. Now the teacher, now calmer, stands up towards the woman, while the Crimson Single Mother warrior was frantically jumping from one side to the other, asking everyone to call her Mommy. In the background, watching the whole chaotic scene, Kota says that in the end, the Single Mother warrior Crimson was a very happy person, so much so that she was overflowing with happiness. Even so, he still couldn't confirm whether or not she was an ally. Seconds later, the woman she stares at the protagonist. She was amazed. The clothes that boy was wearing, his familiar face. She knew she had seen him somewhere before. Without understanding anything, Kota points to himself and asks if the woman was talking to him. With eyes full of passion, she ignores the teacher and the students and walks right past them, going to meet our boy. The single mother Crimson Warrior reveals that she saw him on the news once. She knew that Kota was the mysterious unregistered survivor, the blue hero. The warrior doesn't even pause for Kota to identify himself. She soon reveals that the young man's fighting style really caught her attention, and then she grabbed Kota's hands to show how much of a fan she was. A little uncomfortable with the whole situation, Kota tries to warn her, saying that the woman was too close. Kota didn't want his personal space to be invaded by someone he was seeing for the first time in his life. Even so, she didn't even listen to the boy's words and continued chattering as if there would be no tomorrow. She asks Kota if his ability was really to store everything he touched. She kind of had a similar ability to him, so she was enchanted by the boy's ability and felt like they were old friends. At this point, the woman introduces herself as Hinata Amagi. She also says that her son was in the 5th grade and that he was already a little man. She also asks if Kota was a college student or a working adult. She wanted to know how coldly our boy fought. After all, we already saw that she scared everyone with her threatening expression after the fight. Answering herself, Hinata says that Kota must be super popular. Being invasive, she asked if Kota had a girlfriend. Realizing that she had crossed the line, she apologizes to the boy. After all, her questions were very personal and invasive. Meanwhile, our boy couldn't think of anything other than how much that woman talked non-stop. At that moment, the woman's scorecard caught Hinata's attention. He said that it was not the time for the woman to talk so carelessly. The situation she was in required caution. Realizing her mistake, Hinata apologized for talking too much and forgetting where they were. Looking out of the school through one of the nearby windows, Kota and Hinata witnessed several doors materializing. This meant that countless monsters were about to enter their world. There were 2 formidable warriors side by side. This meant that whatever was on the other side was sensing their presence and that a hunt would begin at any moment. At that moment, countless creatures began to invade the protagonist's world. Among these creatures were flying monsters similar to bats, others enormous with the size of monstrous horses, and other beasts with countless tentacles. And there was a very threatening one ahead of them all. This specific creature had only one eye that was immersed in furious hatred. It wore armor that covered its entire enormous body. This was a monster prepared to defeat whoever its opponent was. In the midst of this, one of the warriors' scorecards announced that due to the union of 2 powerful warriors, the other side would send everything it had to eliminate both of them. Kota was confused. He wanted to know what this other side that Hinata's system mentioned was. Interrupting Kota's thoughts, Hinata revealed that in the end it didn't matter. They just needed to eliminate all those creatures in order to protect everyone. That was all they needed to do. They couldn't lose. The focus. Seconds later, a huge number of monsters advanced towards the Crimson Single Mother Warrior. Hinata didn't care and just started walking towards the approaching sea of monsters. Soon she activated her final skill. Once again, her body began to fill with a blue aura. Now she was no longer the chatty woman from before. Her yellow eyes were focused on her target that was inches away. The woman's skill began to activate. A grotesque creature was inches away from biting the Crimson Single Mother Warrior's arm. But that didn't seem to worry Hinata. Even while Hinata was still, more creatures used their claws to wrap around Hinata's other arm. In the end, the Crimson Single Mother Warrior was surrounded by countless monsters that attacked her together, giving her no chance to escape or hide. Hinata just received the attacks without moving an inch, and a lot of blood began to be splashed everywhere. Kota is shocked to see that chaotic scene. He screams Hinata's name. Not even a minute has passed, and the boy has already lost his partner, and now he would have to contain all the monsters alone. But Kota couldn't have been more wrong. All of this was part of Hinata's plan. Seconds later, Hinata activates the Goddess Evolution Forge. All the aura that previously ran through the woman's body now bathed the environment in various shades of blue, running through the bodies of all the monsters that tried to attack her. In moments, the woman broke the siege of monsters and sliced through countless creatures as if she were a deadly tornado. Hinata stopped a little in front of the students and the surviving teacher. Her intention was to protect everyone and not let the creatures attack the innocent. The students hid behind the teacher. The brave man used his body as a barrier in order to protect his students, while Hinata contained countless other creatures. Many monsters tried to attack the teacher and his students, but the creatures had their heads blown off. The teacher was shocked to see the massacre that was happening right before his eyes, but that wasn't important. He and his students were still alive, and that was what mattered most. In the background, Kota witnessed the entire fight. He could hardly believe his eyes. Hinata seemed to have an ability that changed the shape of her body into the limbs of monsters. With this, she could protect the children and the teacher while fighting perfectly without letting any monster attack her. Kota's scorecard says that this wasn't just a body-shaping ability. The system explains that Hinata's ability allowed her to access Earth's records. This made her body evolve quickly into forms suitable for the environment or dangerous situation she encountered, thus using her potential to the fullest. The woman's ability was tamed by Hinata's excellent judgment and strong willpower. In addition, Hinata had mastered a variety of combat skills, such as high-speed movement and super reflexes, to rise to the rank of S-class. One only had to look at her to realize this. The woman had evolved quite flexibly to match the battle and still protect people while completely eliminating monsters. She was a multitasking warrior at this moment. She was using everything at her disposal to eliminate all the creatures and also protect the students and the teacher. In the end, even with all this explanation, Sota really didn't understand much. He asked Hinata's scorecard to explain everything again later. In the next scene, Hinata's scorecard apologizes for its lack of manners and introduces itself to Sota. Its name was Momo. It apologizes for the late introduction and claims to be Hinata's scorecard. Sota realizes that this was a very polite scorecard, completely different from his own, who shouted all the time, in addition to having no label. At that moment, Sota's scorecard already shows itself revolted by the lack of awareness of his partner. In any case, Sota could not just stand there watching the single mother Crimson Warrior fight alone. So, Sota lowers himself, preparing for battle while activating his ability. At that, Sota says that he only lived to follow two rules. First, always repay kindness with action. At that moment, he activates the whim of the god of the forge. And the second rule was, if someone by his side gave their all, then he should do the same. Already equipped with his weapons, Sota prepares to enter the battle. Hinata smiles when she sees that the protagonist would finally fight by her side. In moments, Sota starts running. He jumped from the second floor of the school building and ran towards a huge creature that was 5 times bigger than him. Without being intimidated or hesitating, Sota landed several clean attacks on the beast's body, slicing it countless times and leaving it in small pieces. At that moment, one of the questions Hinata had asked Sota earlier was answered. She could see for herself the intimidating look on the boy's face after he destroyed one of the creatures. The next moment, Sota used his shield to defend himself from a super punch from another monster, which was even more ferocious. A huge layer of dust rose up all over the hallways and also the schoolyard. The monster felt his fist throb with a sharp pain. At that moment, the creature closed its eyes and gasped in pain. Meanwhile, in parallel, the monster also coughed due to the huge dust that was raised by the impact of the attack. Wasting no time, Sota charged in for his final attack and, just like before, sliced the massive creature's body apart like it was paper, leaving only small pieces behind. Perceiving that our warrior could handle those monsters alone, Hinata decided to leave the beasts on the first floor and those in the schoolyard in Sota's hands. She said this while calling him Blue Hero. once again showing that she was a die-hard fan of the brave and valiant warrior. Our boy felt embarrassed to be called Blue Hero, so he told Hinata that his name was Sota Asahi. Sota revealed that she could call him that whenever she needed, as it would be less embarrassing than his nickname, or rather his hero code name. Hinata didn't understand the boy's reluctance. Blue Hero was such an amazing name. Even so, she did as Sota asked. From now on, she would call him by his name. Completely changing her presence, the aura around Hinata shifted entirely, and her whole essence transformed into a murderous presence. She shouted that now both she and Sota would save that school and all the students together. No one would have their life taken during their shift. Sota, also empowered, agreed with the Crimson Single Mother Warrior. He called her Mommy Hinata and said that soon everything would be over and no one else would be devoured. To think that the boy was almost devoured by a slime, but now he had redeemed himself. He had become a true warrior. With her hand 10 times larger than its natural size, Hinata delivered a charged punch to a green lizard that was trying to break through the woman's defense to devour one of the children. Meanwhile, in the schoolyard, Sota moved like a shadowy assassin, slicing through everything his eyes could identify as a monster emerging from the abyssal darkness of those mysterious portals, using his sharp-edged shield as an aid. The Crimson Single Mother Warrior soon obliterated another red ogre with a precise strike to its chest. The monster didn't even stand a chance. Its fate had been sealed before the battle even began. In the schoolyard, Sota continued eliminating creatures that tried to escape his attacks. Now, his energy overflowed in a serene blue aura as he reaped the lives of several monsters in an instant. The stench of the slain monsters was imprinted in both warriors' noses, not nauseating them, but rather making them more eager, willing, and determined to wipe out everything in their path. Despite the endless horde of monsters pouring from the portals, the Crimson Single Mother Warrior and our boy continued the cleanup effortlessly. At the end of the hunt, Hinata jumped from the second floor and landed beside our protagonist, who was exhausted. The important thing was that he had no serious injuries. Sota was catching his breath as the last monster before him vanished. Still breathless, Sota stood up, searching for more monsters. He asked the Crimson Single Mother Warrior if they had already taken care of all the creatures. Returning to her usual playful and light-hearted manner, Hinata said that they had eliminated all the beasts, and that it had been a long time since she had played like that. The woman even mentioned that she had strained her back and was exhausted. Even though he was exhausted and dripping with sweat, Sota realized they still needed to rescue the wounded. Even if there were no more monsters in the area, there could still be survivors in danger or people who had been left behind in the chaos while trying to escape. Also out of breath, Hinata says that they didn't need to do that. They had nothing to worry about because the rescue team would arrive soon, and there was also no sign of life under the rubble. Sota checks the surroundings and realizes that Hinata was telling the truth. He didn't see anyone who needed his help. Everything was very calm, and the boy could really rest a little. All spontaneous and cheerful, the Crimson Single Mother Warrior says that it was almost lunchtime, so she invites Sota. It would be great if he came to eat at her house and keep her company. Since the two were battle partners and she was a Sota fan, she says that this was the least she could do for him. Besides, Sota also needed to replenish the calories lost, and there's nothing better than a meal made by the Crimson Single Mother Warrior herself. Still trying to catch his breath, Sota looks at Hinata. He didn't think it was a bad idea and would love to keep her company. To do this, our scene changes to another location. In a house, we see the protagonist completely open-mouthed. He sees that the banquet she promised earlier was real, and here it was huge. He couldn't believe seeing so much food. He even asked if by chance he could eat all of that. She, who prepared all of that, replied that he could eat it all, and could eat as much as he wanted. While eating, the protagonist asked if, by chance, she wouldn't eat. She said she would, but first she would have to wash the dishes here. The protagonist, who was with his entire family, simply thanks her for the food, and only then does he start to devour it. While eating, the protagonist felt as if he had ascended to heaven. The food was delicious, and the taste was also familiar. Only after eating a little bit did she see the protagonist there, completely happy with it. If by chance he wanted more food like that, he just had to come back, and she would prepare some food for the protagonist again. Then, out of nowhere, he felt an enormous pressure coming from behind him. Frightened by this, he turns around and finds a boy at the door. This was Taiyan, Renata's son. He asks, "Who could this guy be by any chance?" She, who didn't want to interrupt, ends up simply introducing her son to the protagonist, saying that he was Taiyan. Only then does she ask him to go over to the table to eat with the protagonist. But looking at the boy's face, he understands that the protagonist wants to kidnap his mother. Even the card appears asking what the protagonist really did to make this boy so angry with him. Already getting the whole story wrong, he approaches the protagonist, saying that if by any chance he wants to take advantage of the boy's mother, he will capture the protagonist himself, and there he will take revenge that he won't like. And remember, he saw him on TV earlier today, and by chance he was fighting some monsters, but he was defeated, which ended up happening that his mother had to leave. She is going there to help the protagonist. And if by chance he doesn't want to be beaten for the second time, it would be better to eat and only then leave their house. The boy's mother, realizing everything that was happening, simply decides to interrupt, asking the boy to go to his room now, and only then does she apologize to the protagonist. Only after the boy left, he ended up remembering what the boy had just said. He was almost dying. What happened was that the boy's mother appeared, and if by chance he makes the boy's mother die or something happens to her, he will be taking revenge. What he actually said was completely right, because at that moment, if she hadn't appeared, he would most likely have died. And then, those slimes alone would be able to defeat the protagonist. If it weren't for her help, he and those kids who were in that school would most likely all be dead. At first, he thought that this monster would be weak, so he went all in. But the moment he faced the monster, he knew that this monster was not a monster that had a B rating, it was a stronger monster. And with that, he almost died. Even though his stats here at the moment are at an extremely high quality, he ended up losing to that monster. He needed to learn ways to improve his fights. And for that, then, he stands up and asks Renata for something. This was a simple thing. He just asks her to make him her disciple, since this is the first time he has met someone who is stronger than him, and if by chance he manages to become strong with her help, it is very likely that he will be able to protect many more people. And not only that, with this, he will be earning many more points. To be able to be her disciple, he will do anything to make her accept something like that. Only then does Renata start to think. She wasn't looking for a disciple so soon. In order to accept, the protagonist even said that he would be taking care of the household chores, but she said that this wasn't a concern at the moment since she could handle that. But in the end, she ends up refusing. She can't accept him as a disciple, but she can do something. Teach him the things she knows, like fighting, surviving, and defeating monsters stronger than her. In the end, it would be like a friend. The protagonist is even surprised by this, but then she says that talking about battle points wasn't her strong point. So in the end, she also wanted to have a kind of friend who has the same power as her. Only then does he stand up and thank her. He thanks Renata for basically accepting the proposal to be almost a disciple. So, for that, she starts to say that, to fight on a battlefield, you need to have a reason. And to do this, she asks the protagonist what his reason is, or why he is fighting the monsters. Her reason for being a hero was simple. She was a single mother, and her goal was to protect her son. And to do this, she looked for a way to earn points. Points so that she could at least make her powers grow more and more. And with these new powers, she managed to defeat many powerful monsters. Then, he comments that he understands why she is fighting the monsters to protect her son. Only then does he start to remember his sister. So he also has a main reason for fighting the monsters to at least protect someone. This person he was talking about was his sister. She went through a lot. Now he wants to give back, at least help his sister have a good life. She liked to draw, so he intended to put her in a painting school. But to do this, he needs to earn points. The moment he talks about this, she starts to cry, saying that he was a good brother. However, behind the scenes, we find the boy irritated with the protagonist because he saw that he kind of made her cry a little. But this single mother simply decides to grab the protagonist's hand. Only then does she comment that the protagonist has been through many bad things in life along with his sister, knowing that they both went through suffering. She even wanted to invite the protagonist's sister to come with him here at her house so that both of them, at least once, and well, since she had accepted inviting her sister to have a meal with her, he ended up using teleportation, and at that moment, he arrived in the room where his sister was. There, he invited her to go to a certain place. She didn't understand, but she was teleported anyway. Thus, she arrived at a place where she met that MILF of ours. Upon meeting the protagonist's sister, she was happy but also surprised because the person in front of her was a mother she admired, one of the S-rank adventurers. For some reason, she hesitated, and so he turned to the clerk and asked if, by any chance, Renata was famous. The clerk had previously thought he was naive, but now she knew he really was. She approached Renata and then asked for her autograph. Only after that did she explain everything that had happened. Afterward, she grabbed Sota's head and asked him to thank her for everything she had done, but Renata told her it wasn't necessary since everything had already been resolved. Even so, she ended up inviting the protagonist's sister to join them at the table to eat a little. The protagonist's sister, on the other hand, couldn't believe it. The food on the table looked delicious even before she had tasted it. So they all sat down and started eating. After a while, they enjoyed a good meal together as a family. Even the cards above seemed to reach a climax as well. After this crazy climax, she suddenly interrupted, saying it had been a long time since she had a meal like this, just as she had had now. Then, she turned to a photo and commented that if he were around too, he could be enjoying this moment. Meanwhile, the scene shifted to the government guild, where we found some people walking around. As they talked, they mentioned that their guild members had achieved good results this month since they had managed to recruit some C-rank hunters or even higher-ranked ones for their team. However, to advance their organization, they had also included some people with a more violent nature. These individuals, however, neither ignored nor cooperated much with them. Then someone asked what he thought about this. He said he was fine with it because, in the end, undesirable people always showed their good side in front of him. After all, when talking face-to-face, anyone would want to be his ally. At the end of the day, everything could be summed up as soul-to-soul communication. Still, to him, everything he had said sounded a bit too optimistic. However, they shouldn't worry too much about finding strong people. They needed to go with the flow. Now their leader said they had to move on to the next step. It was time for the ball and picnics. Now that everyone was ready, they could set off, as their guild would be able to accomplish this no matter what. The battle between Sota and Hinata, the Crimson Single Mom warrior, was extremely intense. Sota was on the defensive, blocking a barrage of attacks and feeling completely cornered and overwhelmed. Even so, Hinata did not hold back. Sota realized that despite his struggle to block her attacks, that power was merely the raw strength of the Crimson Single Mom warrior. She wasn't even using a skill. This made the protagonist even more intimidated. Worst of all, the boy couldn't find a single opening. All he could do was defend himself and avoid being crushed, but even that wasn't working. Sota couldn't grasp Hinata's true power. It was as if she were a beast hungry for power, thirsty for blood, and starving for victory. That was the vast difference between them. Sota couldn't even begin to comprehend the immense gap between their abilities. Moments later, Sota started getting pushed back, continuing to be bombarded with countless punches. His body began to slow down. He could no longer keep up with the speed of the Crimson Single Mom warrior. In the end, he was struck in the face by a punch. But he couldn't let things end like this. Sota was determined. He had to counterattack somehow. In a desperate moment, Sota tried to regain his balance and lunged forward, attempting to land an uppercut on the Crimson Single Mom warrior. However, such a desperate move was too obvious. The warrior noted that Sota's swing was far too wide, and his form had a glaring flaw. She simply dodged by lowering her body beside the protagonist. At the same time, she delivered a powerful punch straight to the boy's stomach. The blow was like a blue meteor crashing into Sota's body. Being such a small and static target, the boy didn't even have a chance to defend himself and was hit head-on. Without difficulty, the Crimson Single Mom warrior hurled the protagonist's small, fragile body against the ground. As Sota's body hit the ground, Hinata advanced with an imposing gaze and struck him again, this time in the face. Her eyes were cold and calculating, like a fierce predator cornering its prey. Seconds later, her expression completely changed. She let out a smile as she wiped the sweat from her forehead, saying that the boy's stance had been far too obvious. And that was one of the points he had to improve. At that moment, our boy was completely wrecked, writhing in pain on the ground, unable to even respond to the woman who had almost effortlessly reaped his life with sheer brute force. His points card was baffled. How could his partner be so useless? He had been utterly obliterated by a stay-at-home mom. Agonizing, our boy stared at the woman, assessing her. Her breathing hadn't faltered for a second. Her strikes were heavy and precise, and her killing intent was akin to that of a beast. In the end, he summarized the fighting style of the Crimson Single Mother warrior in just one word. This woman was a monster. Sota didn't even know what kind of resistance she possessed. As if everything had been nothing more than a stroll through an amusement park, Hinata, brimming with excitement and joy, called out to Sota for another match. After all, repeated practice through training would lead to perfection. She extended her hand to help pick up the shattered pieces of our hero. To help him get back up. Sota found Hinata very mysterious. As he got up, he questioned her, saying it was time for her to reveal how she had acquired such overwhelming strength. There was no way that incredible power had been obtained easily. He wanted to know the secret. Maybe she was cheating. Hinata's smile vanished the moment she heard the word cheating come out of Sota's mouth. In truth, she had no idea what the boy was talking about. But Sota didn't stop there. If it wasn't cheating, then the Crimson Single Mother warrior must have learned martial arts, or who knows what else. That could reasonably explain how she possessed such tremendous skill and superhuman strength. Hinata was overjoyed. Sota was finally paying close attention to her and analyzing her abilities. The Crimson Single Mother warrior said it wasn't like that at all, that her ability had nothing to do with martial arts. In fact, her strength was actually something quite simple. But our boy didn't believe her. He had seen her fight. How could there be no trick or intense training behind all that power? Then Hinata pointed at our boy, saying there was only one thing that had made her stronger. Besides the fact that she had gained her ability. Of course, that was unexpected, and so she had our boy's full attention. Sota listened carefully to the next words of the Crimson Single Mother warrior. In the next scene, the woman pulled a notebook from between her two mountains and said that she always wrote everything down to improve all her abilities. Hinata reported this with extreme enthusiasm, as if all the protagonist's problems would be solved if he did exactly what she had done. On the other hand, Sota collapsed to the ground in shock. How could a simple set of notes turn a stay-at-home mom into a bloodthirsty and extremely lethal warrior? It was an enigma yet to be deciphered, and none of it made sense. How could some notes be the secret behind this woman's strength? Then Hinata opened her notebook and wrote something down. She explained to our boy that throughout her life, she had always been crazy about making notes. Hinata used to write everything in notebooks, from household budgets to meal plans. It was easy and had always been part of her daily life. After the portals appeared, she started making some different notes. She has countless notebooks, and they contain all her energy expenditures, campaign-related RP information, missing skills and traits, attributes of monsters she has defeated, and so on. As she enthusiastically explained her method, Hinata said that she wrote down everything, no matter how minimal, about battles and points. She is a born scholar and also a VIP-level housewife. Seconds later, Sota finally stands up, understanding Hinata's method. In the end, she didn't use any cheats or train arduously like a lone warrior to develop and awaken her techniques. She simply described everything in detail, better yet, in the smallest details, everything this new world and the portals brought to them. This inspires our boy to buy a notebook himself and start taking his own notes about this new world to become incredibly strong like the Crimson Single Mom warrior who now felt like his new mentor. But soon Sota snaps back to reality and gets pissed off. None of this made, sense, and he screamed like a madman. There was no way someone who only dedicated themselves to taking notes could turn into a monster fighter out of nowhere. Our boy thought Hinata was trying to make a fool of him, saying nonsensical things, so he demanded that the woman tell the truth. Tired of just watching this argument that was leading nowhere, Hinata's point card intervenes in the conversation. It asks Hinata to show Sota the first page of her notebook. The point card explains that it wasn't enough to just take notes randomly without a clear goal. The key for the notes to truly make someone stronger was to clarify objectives, identify challenges, and also visualize one's daily battle, history, scoring everything with the goal of analyzing and improving where necessary. First, it was necessary to set a broad goal and write down the essential elements to achieve it, then determine what needed to be done after identifying the objective. Hinata and the point card saw a famous athlete doing this on TV and decided to copy him. The point card also says that through repeated battles, it was possible to identify missing skills and elements one by one. Writing down objectives helped track one's main goal, milestones, and, most importantly, progress. At this point, Hinata also adds that she kept notes on her evolution options. She said that keeping track of effective evolution choices based on battle outcomes allowed for quicker adaptation. In the next scene, Sota's perspective broadens. He found the idea of creating an evolution tip sheet interesting. Maybe he should start writing down weapon ideas too. It would be a great strategy. Sota reveals that he thought Hinata became strong through extensive and arduous training, mastering martial arts or training in the mountains, all because of her fluid and precise movements. Hinata says there was no way she could have done all that. After all, who would do that at her age? All she did was buy martial arts skills, hyper-reflexes, and of course, take notes. Our protagonist's point card calls him useless. After all, the boy could gather points and buy those skills too. But this made our protagonist irritated. He couldn't simply buy them. Hinata catches Sota's attention. They had already talked a lot, and invites the boy to another battle. Sota immediately agreed. He needed to improve his skills, and so another duel began. Meanwhile, at the base of Mount Fuji, a Class A monster, Orostragon, was dueling against someone. His opponent was an old lady with white hair. She had a fire ability and was about to unleash her attack on that insignificant monster. By simply moving her arms, two long, flaming whips of fire stopped in the cold mountain wind. At her command, her ability, Reflective Light, struck the jaw of the great Class A monster, Orostragon, head-on. As the monster was nearly thrown back, the old lady commanded her other ability, Black Fall. The other fire whip struck the upper part of the monster's head, burying it in the snow. The creature was already finished, lying on the ground with no chance of counterattacking. However, the old lady had not yet finished her duel. Seeing the monster buried in the crater, the woman waved her hands and arms once more. The serene yellow fire began to swirl around her again, as if it were part of her body. As she moved her hands, all those flames entered the body of the Class A monster, Orostragon. Then she unleashed her final attack, Explosive Refinement. A massive explosion began to consume the creature's body. Not only was the Class A monster, Orostragon, torn apart, but part of the mountain as well. Without worrying about such destruction, the white-haired old lady simply stood there, admiring as her masterpiece destroyed everything. In the end, with everything already over, the old woman opened a bamboo umbrella and began to leave the battlefield. However, her path was blocked by a mysterious visitor and his group. A red-haired boy caught the old lady's attention, while two more warriors watched from the background. It was our flamboyant red-haired boy. He claimed that the rumors about the old lady's abilities were true. Her reputation truly matched the reality he had just witnessed with his own eyes. The red-haired boy shouted that the abilities of that old woman were, in fact, those of a world-class survivor of the highest rank. That was why he had fallen in love with her, deeply in love. The white-haired old lady found those words interesting, just as she found her visitor interesting. After all, he was the son of Minister Prime, or as we already know, our flamboyant, red-haired boy. Now let's proceed with the proper introductions. That old lady is 78 years old, and her name is Shinobu Himegami. She is the oldest living Class S survivor to this day. Shinobu Himegami revealed that it was a great honor to meet the bodybuilding son of the Prime Minister. Without hesitation, the boy stated his reason for coming. This flamboyant youth wanted the old lady's power, and of course he would do anything to obtain it. So the young man invited the old lady to join his guild. Shinobu Himegami only needed to name the price for becoming one of his men, or rather, one of his fighters. However, the old lady did not even pay proper attention to the boy's words. She walked past him and his men, uninterested in the conversation, leaving the red-haired boy talking to the wind. Perceiving the boy's confusion, Shinobu Himegami says that surely the Prime Minister's son had many young people he could trust, so instead of going after them, why would he seek out an old lady like her? As she walked away, the old lady revealed that today was not the day she would join his group, but someday the time would come when they would all have to fight together. However, now was not the time. Besides, she could not meet everyone's expectations at that moment, and so she distanced herself, while our flamboyant boy merely turned his face, watching the old lady walk slowly down the mountain. At that moment, Shinobu Himegami spoke her final words, bidding farewell and also revealing that she would wait until their next meeting. Our flamboyant warrior stood alongside two other warriors, and the one with glasses bluntly stated that the Prime Minister's son had been rejected. But that did not make the red-haired boy angry. He knew that the old lady Shinobu Himegami was someone difficult to approach. He had already expected that their conversation would go that way. In the end, she was not the true target of the red-haired warrior. His real target was elsewhere, and he was eager for that encounter. The flamboyant warrior, while wiping a bit of blood from his mouth, said that the boy he was looking for was an exception, or rather a rare unsculpted gem. After all, he was not a rescued one. At that moment, the scene cuts to our protagonist, Sota, once again being utterly defeated by our beautiful Hinata, the crimson single-mother warrior. The boy's life is not easy. But before I go, leave a comment below telling me what you think of this manga and what you like about it, what you liked, so I can read it and include it in the next video. And also, leave a like below. I think I'm going to go with that now. Maybe I'll see you around now, or in the next part.